Hi, I'm Shan Wu with a undercolor of law analysis of the legalities and illegalities of the ICE raids being conducted by the Trump regime. Now, Trump, as we all know, has been promising a massive upheaval in how he wants to treat migrants and terrorize the immigrant community. They have been promising from the start raids and deportations, and now they have taken the first steps towards that, and nothing is off limits, not even schools. So what has happened so far is, let's start a little bit in the procedural aspect of things, which is DOJ issued a memo by the acting Deputy Attorney General, Emil Bove, one of Trump's former personal lawyers. And we can take a look at that memo, which is relatively short, but I want to talk about some key takeaways because they need to lay out a memo like that to give them some of the legal cover for what they want to do. So the first thing is they're saying that this is how DOJ is going to support Trump's executive order, which was called Protecting the American People Against Invasion. And the memo says, and it opens, as you'll see when we put it up, it wants to focus on the criminal aspects of street gangs, MS-13, and the cartels, right? Because that's how they get to the immigration aspect. Now, let's point out right away, that is part of the facade for targeting Hispanic communities. And when you think about the massive change in how they're going to use personnel, the massive deployment of resources necessary to get anywhere close to the kind of deportations that Trump claims he wants to get to, then you have to think about what that means for the day-to-day safety of us and what the agencies like DOJ or Homeland Security do. Now, I'm reminded through some, off-the-record informal talks with experts in Homeland Security that while cartels, like other organized crime groups, are violent and dangerous and very bad for our society, lots of people die from them, particularly from the drug use, the cartels themselves, they are focused upon drug trafficking, not inflicting mass casualty events. That's not their aim. You don't make money by just inflicting mass terrorism events on people. And so when you redeploy everything allegedly towards the cartels, what you're really doing is just try to deport people, you're taking resources away from the usual deployment towards the classical terrorism. So you want to play pretend politics, and that endangers our everyday safety. Trump just wants to live up to his promises, to his base, and to feed this kind of frenzy, an anti-immigrant, anti-minority kind of sentiment. And the result of that is going to be not enough resources that have been devoted towards being aware of and combating and protecting us from international terrorism. Now, here's another way it's going to hurt everyone. The everyday safety in the community is going to be lowered because you are terrifying these communities, many of whom come, as my parents did, from places where they were worried about oppression. They were worried about reporting crimes to the police because the police were part of the problem. They were oppressive, sometimes corrupt. So the challenge has always been in a lot of immigrant communities to build trust with the community, that it's important and we can help protect you if you tell law enforcement about things. But by emphasizing this notion of deportation, you're scaring all these communities and they're going to be less willing to come forward to report crimes. And if that happens, again, that's an example of Trump's political posturing hurting the everyday safety, even though he's saying he's trying to reform immigration. Now, part of the memo is they're trying to threaten prosecution of state and local officials for obstruction of justice, for violating federal criminal laws, and they want to throw the supremacy clause of the Constitution around the lot as they try to leverage these local and state officials. So let's review a moment. We've talked about this before. Sanctuary city laws, very wide variety of them. They take different forms, but they are not illegal to begin with. The memo from DOJ takes the MAGA perspective that sanctuary policies violate the provision of the federal immigration law, which states that no state or local government can prohibit or in any way restrict the federal government from doing their job in terms of the INS information and enforcement of the immigration statutes. So, as should be obvious, nothing in that law requires state or local officials to comply with what the feds want to do. They can't obstruct it, just like you've heard some people say, they can't harbor people, yeah, if the person's a criminal, you can't harbor them, okay? Undocumented migrants, as we're going to talk about, are not criminals by definition. They're just undocumented. And as yesterday's memo asserts, in the DOJ memo, they're trying to say that there's no room for the states to do anything than what DOJ says, and that's simply wrong. The federal law leaves states and locals officials entirely free to refuse cooperation. That's different than harboring and obstructing, but they simply don't have to do what the federal government says. And there's numerous case law issues on this, and the basic concept to take away from this is under the 10th Amendment, the federal government can't commandeer the state governments. That's what DOJ is trying to do. That's what Trump's people want to do. They just want to say, supremacy clause, you have to do what we tell you to do. And that's really not how the Constitution works at all. So remember that distinction. Obstructing, harboring some known criminal has nothing to do with whether the state laws say you have to actively reach out to ICE, you have to actively cooperate with them, share your database information. It has nothing to do with that at all. Now, in the meantime, the actual raids have actually begun. So, for example, in Newark was one of the first raids, maybe the first that we've got some coverage about. And let's listen to the New York mayor's reaction to that.
In our city, without a warrant. They went in the back of the establishment. We believe that there were 3 people who they say were undocumented that they detained, but they also detained folks that were, in fact, citizens of this country. One person showed that military veteran identification and was still questioned anyway. People were fingerprinted. Pictures of their IDs and face were taken there. When I got this information, I was appalled, upset, angry that this would happen here in this state, in this country, that this would be allowed. Since we've said something about it, I convened my folks. I said, we can't just let this happen and not say anything, that we at least have to say something. And so we did, and here we are. And as a result of that, I've got a series of phone calls and emails that were not too nice. One of them says, oh, you're not going to stand idly by. These are dangerous rapists and murderers that the liberals in this country have protected far too long. You want to defy the federal government? F around and find out what will happen. You little whatever. The problem with this is that none of these people were rapists or murderers or criminals. The problem with it is that ICE went in there without a warrant. And we can disagree on politics. You can disagree with me about the role immigrants play in the economy of our community. You can disagree with me about the fact that most immigrants are not criminals. In fact, they are victims of violence in cities. We can disagree about whether you support mass deportation or not. But what we must agree on is that the thing that separates this country from many other countries around the world is the Constitution of the United States.
So really importantly, he says U.S. citizens were detained. One was a military vet with his ID. He was still questioned, fingerprinted. ICE has admitted to this, and you're going to keep hearing this over and over again. They say something to the effect of, while we're doing field operations, we're going to encounter citizens. Now, here's the question. In the field, out in the streets, wherever they may be, how do you know who to approach, who to question, who to detain? Answer, I'm supplying you, by how they look. That's per se racial profiling. You're not seeking, ICE isn't seeking a particular individual with particular characteristics, like that's what you have an arrest warrant for. There's not a suspect in the crime they're looking for. They're just looking for people who might be migrants because they look like they might be migrants. And the Trump regime knows that. And they know that their supporters, the ones they've encouraged racist tendencies in, can be easily encouraged to continue a us versus them being the ones that don't look like us. Because you lump them into the bucket of, they're all potential criminals anyway, right? Now, the mayor also mentioned the warrant issue. So let's draw another important distinction here that I alluded to before. Immigration laws and undocumented people are not criminals. The immigration law actually is not really a criminal law. Being undocumented is not a crime. It's gotten a little bit blurrier now, and it's always been blurry because the punishments, the repercussions, are quite criminal in nature. But it's not a criminal law issue the way, for example, stealing, robbing someone is. It's a little bit of a hybrid, but it's important to know that's not a criminal enforcement issue. That's why I think that's why you always hear Trump blabbing and lying about all the dangerous migrants that are here, the illegals, he calls them, who have committed all these crimes. Yeah, sure, there are people like that. But they want to gloss over the fact that the vast majority of undocumented people are not these criminals. And as the mayor points out, that's the problem here, right? You're going after people and they aren't people wanted for violent crimes. So the normal criminal restrictions apply in terms of the constitutionality of searches and even talking to people. Now, you don't always need a warrant to go into a public place, and you're going to hear that a lot. ICE is going to keep saying, don't need a warrant to go to a public place. That's fine. Nobody needs a warrant to go into a public place. Not you, not me, not the police. Here's what you need. If you are the government, if you work for the government, you're a law enforcement agent, you can contact anybody you want. Meaning you can chat with them, say what's up. If you do that a lot and you only do that to certain classes of people, it's going to become a little bit suspicious because the contact's not going to be the end of it, right? The next thing is the stop, meaning they can't leave that easily. It's different than an arrest. So in law school, you learn there's contact, stop, and arrest being detained, really. Contact, you don't need any legal basis for it, for the most part. The stop, think of traffic stops, you need reasonable suspicion to make the stop. Classic example, the brake light is out. They made an illegal right turn. Next, if you want to detain them, the old "am I free to leave" officer, you need probable cause. Okay, that kind of escalation still applies to ICE no matter where they are, and that's something to really keep our eye on, is what are they really doing here? What reasonable suspicion do they have to be questioning these people? In that Newark raid, I would put money on the idea the only reasonable suspicion to question that U.S. citizen military service vet is because he looks like he might be a migrant. He looks Hispanic. Now, let's talk about raids on schools, because that's coming. In Oklahoma, they talk about how they will be happy with a ICE raid on a school because their real purpose is to reunite the children with their parents who are going to be deported. So let's just burst that kind of silly bubble. When would you ever need a raid on a school? I mean, if you're really concerned about the kids being reunited, fine. They'll get let out of school. Someone's got to take them to the parents. Maybe they go home and the parents aren't there. Child Protective Services, whatever it is. But you don't need to raid the school. Like, why would you need to have a raid? I mean, it's just for people who, are military wannabes. They want to be special ops people. And so what can be done about this? Well, the schools, like in New Jersey, are already putting out some guidance about what to do. Few things to remember. Students have privacy protection under FERPA, the Federal Educational Records Privacy Act. They can opt out, their families can, of disclosure to anybody else of this information. Now, warrant subpoena is a different issue, but the schools are being told, or they should be told, that if ICE shows up and just wants to kind of look through your files, don't do that, because that violates the privacy aspect of things. Most importantly, with this idea of going to the schools, because there's probably something in there about wanting to really leverage the community by getting to their children, right? It doesn't matter what your legal status is. The Supreme Court has said you have a constitutional right to attend school where you live. All right, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. We're still making some adjustments on the set, so hope you like that. Thank you for the feedback. Keep those replies coming. It's always really good to hear from you. All right, talk to you soon.